A lot of people here. A lot of people. Really awesome to be here. Thank you all for coming. I've got an interesting story that I wanted to tell you. It's the story of Vastaamo. So just let's have a show of hands. Who hasn't heard about Vastaamo? Seriously, we got one. Where are you from, sir? Oh, yeah. Very far from Finland. So, that's understandable. But anyway, I thought I'd tell you the story because there's a lot of details about this case out there, a lot of news articles, a lot of false information. Some of it false because, well, journalists don't do due diligence or just somebody posting stuff online. So I gathered all of that stuff into one story, and that's the story I want to tell you about. Well, that's my name. Work as a security operations manager for a Finnish company called Ivan. This is kind of a story about a database, and we do databases, but I'm not here to sell you a managed database. But if you're thinking about databases, Ivan does manage databases. So a small sales pitch there. I work as a security operations manager for the EU area. Some of you who listen to podcasts might have heard me speak previously on Turvakäräjät, thank you, which is briefly on a pause. We did a new episode just before Disobey because we thought it would be a cool thing to do. It turned out just like all the other episodes, so sorry about that. But fun to do, and I do it with Juho Jauhiainen, who is actually the next speaker. I'm warming up the crowd for him. He's going to talk about mental health and how I helped him lose it. And Laura Kankaala, who is also our very valuable and loved co-host. So check it out. There's 106 episodes of us chatting about topical stuff, and if you're interested what we thought about Corona when it came out, it's all there. When I approach the case of Vastaamo, not really from a technical perspective, I don't want to talk about that. Well, I'll talk about the tech too, but I don't want to just talk about the database or the breach. I rather want to frame this as a story, kind of a classical story, a sort of a tragedy. And I think when I thought about the whole thing, there was a kind of a narrative arc to it. It was kind of like a Greek tragedy. There was like 3 parts to it. And that's how I built this presentation. And I did have access to a lot of information about this case because I used to work at Nixu when we did the forensic investigation of the server that got breached. But I'm not going to use that information here where it is not in the public domain. Because a lot of the stuff that we put in the report that we delivered to the customer was actually published, and I'll tell you when later in the presentation, but you can go to Finlex and find a lot of snippets which you can almost use to build the whole report out. But everything you see here is public, possibly not available anymore, but it was public at some time. If you think about a tragedy, usually the arc is that there is a hero who does something, and then there's the downfall, and then there's the end of the tragedy. It follows this kind of an arc. And this word, this hybris, I think I'm not using this word to say that Vastaamo or its leadership were arrogant or insolent. I'm just using it kind of to try to capture the inbuilt arrogance in being successful in a world where most people aren't. It doesn't mean that these people did something wrong, so please don't read this wrong. But I think let's say arrogance before the gods is probably the best thing that I can use to describe what I mean by this word. So I'm going to tell you first about how Vastaamo got started. It was founded in 2010. The idea brewed in 2008 by Ville Tapio and his mother Niina Tapio. Ville has been in the media, he has been portrayed as some kind of a computer guy, a computer wizard, like a self-made software developer. That's not exactly true. He has background in IT, but he's a business guy, first and foremost. And I'm just going to have to say the claim that he actually programmed the Vastaamo systems, that's not true. That's false. They had outside people do that, professional programmers, to create the system that we're going to talk about. But they had an idea back 15 years ago really, like how can we combine the psychotherapy business and the online world? We would call in Finland digiloikka, which is like probably digital leap, like digitalize something that wasn't digital before. And they had this business idea for Vastaamo, and they wanted to offer things online. It was very, very successful. By 18, they had already 25 locations. They had 400 employees at that point. I have the old slides here. It's actually 221 employees. That's a mistake. And Ville was the CEO from 2013. And let's not emphasize too much his IT background, but that got him the idea of combining these two worlds. So the original idea was to serve clients over the internet. I'm not sure if you've heard about this idea, that you have a business and then you take it to the internet, but they had that idea, and that was actually really good. But I'm not sure what actually just didn't make it take off. Maybe the technology wasn't ready, maybe the customer base wasn't ready, maybe people didn't trust the technology enough. Now it's commonplace. You can have like Google Meets with a therapist or whatever, but that's where they started. Quickly they realized that the types of stuff that people come to a therapist to talk about, actually just having a Teams meeting is really not enough. As we all know, having had this terrible remote work situation for a couple of years. Some of us like it. Personally, I do. My team is abroad anyway, so it's not like I'm going to go to the office and meet them. But for a lot of people, I kind of realized that the discussion over Teams or Google Meet or whatever your company uses just isn't the same thing as sitting across the table from somebody. So they opened locations. They opened 25 of those, a lot of locations, just to have the therapists meet with their patients. And they gathered hundreds of those therapists in one location, because usually the profession of psychotherapy is sort of a single entrepreneur business. So you get your license, you get your training, and then you have your own business and you meet clients and you build them, and there's a lot of that overhead. So gathering them all and having them as salaried employees was a relief for a lot of the therapists, because they could focus on patient work instead of doing things like bookkeeping and billing and all of the marketing and all that stuff. They were doing actually very well, and I think this has been overlooked a lot, that how well they were doing and how big of a player they were in the space that they were operating in. And the Association of Finnish Work gave them recognition as a Finnish social enterprise. And this was one of their goals. They wanted to open centers, or I'm not sure what to call them, not really clinics, but like locations for therapists to meet patients, even in cities where it didn't really make financial sense. Because if you want to cover like 90% of Finland, you need to go to like 4 big cities and that's it. But they had 25 locations because their mission was to bring psychotherapy more available for people. And this really bugged me when I read the articles about it, because it just felt like people are looking to blame somebody when this hack happened. And they, of course, started blaming Vastaamo because they didn't have anybody else. And we had all these articles about ex-psychotherapists say that Vastaamo was a bullshit place to work and the CEO was a bad guy and it was all about money. And the facts that I've gathered about this don't really support that black and white narrative. It was more complicated than that. So the old saying that news articles are usually accurate unless they write about something you know about, well, proved to be true again here. So it's more complicated than that, because you don't get that mark of a Finnish social enterprise by trying to maximize profits and being an asshole to your employees. It just doesn't happen. So later in June 2019, Intera Partners, which is a venture capital firm, they bought the majority share of Vastaamo. They wanted to fund the business and have it grow quickly. And of course, Ville Tapio and his family, Nina Tapio, others, were majority shareholders, and it was already a good business, so they got wealthy in the process. And they wanted to grow the business. So this is going to be relevant later. So in my opinion, just reading up on it, it was treated as a success story up until the crime, when it was kind of recast as a villain or some kind of a problem company in the space. They innovated on digital services, that's good. Rising need for mental health care, obviously, and growing as a business. So sort of you don't have to do anything wrong to kind of succumb to hybris in that kind of a situation. Just have the audacity of being successful. As most of us know, in a few years, everything took a very dark turn. It was very different. And in a Greek tragedy, there's first hybris, and hybris invites a visitation from the nemesis, which is the goddess who enacts retribution to those who show arrogance before the gods. This was interesting because in this case, this actually happened in the form of a cyber attacker. They made themselves known in a bunch of Finnish forums. There was Ylilauta, which most of us know, R-Suomi from Reddit, which all of us probably know, and Torilauta, which is a dark web site, specifically Finnish language websites. And they approached the Finnish public by posting into all of these places with a message like this. And they said that they've hacked the psychotherapy clinic and they want 40 bitcoins. And if not met, if their conditions are not met, they are going to gradually release patient records. They said that they're going to release 100 records per day. And they had tens of thousands of them. At this point, the police, Nixu, the Cybersecurity Center of Finland, had all been investigating this case for a month because we got contacted pretty early on. Nixu's job was to actually just do an autopsy on the server. That's it. Black box, everything else. We weren't a part of the criminal investigation. We weren't a part of anything else. We just did the forensics on the server, as these things go. The public-private partnership is quite guarded because, of course, the police want to make sure that nothing that they release is going to impede their investigation, an ongoing investigation, and a very serious one. So that was our role. I was the head of investigation for that forensics work. I didn't actually do the work. I had a couple of much more talented people than me do the physical work. But I signed the report, and that's why I'm also here talking about it, because like other DFIR reports, you just send them, send the bill, you get paid, and that's it. But this story, of course, keeps living on. So discussion starts in Torilauta, which is a Finnish darknet website, and they post it there. And you can see the first reactions from Anonymous, and I'll translate for you, and I hope nobody brought their small children. It says, "Mitähän paskaa tää nyt on," which basically means, what is this bullshit? And let's say that the reaction from the lay internet user was hostile or more. So Ransom Man, the attacker, was using that name, did not gain a lot of sympathy, even in the darknet marketplaces, where people routinely engage in illicit activities. But the point was, of course, to put public pressure on the company and make them more likely to pay. And at this point, we had been following this for several weeks, and I just kind of had the feeling that the attacker is probably from Finland, based on a number of things, because none of the actual individual facts were enough to just, I didn't have a picture of his passport, for example. But just the fact that he chose the places he chose, like Ylilauta, I'm pretty sure it's not popular outside of Finland. R-Suomi, well, discoverable maybe, but probably not popular. And Torilauta, it even has the Suomi CAPTCHA, where there are Estonian language sentences and Finnish sentences, and you have to tell the difference. Basically, you have to be either Estonian or Finnish to be able to do that, or use machine translation or whatever. But anyway, the point is that there were several things pointing towards the fact that the attacker might be Finnish. And that was at least my working assumption. Didn't change anything, just can't stop thinking about like who this might be. So R-Suomi and Ylilauta, they removed the threads immediately because they were also sharing a link to the patient records. But Torilauta, being a dark website, they didn't close or shut down the threads at that time, but they had set a timer. And the sysop of Torilauta had said, even in the beginning of the whole dark web enterprise, that he's going to run this for 3 years, because the closer, let's say the longer you run a website like this, the more likely it is that you're going to get caught, which is actually really smart. So in November in 2020, 3 years was up, he closed Torilauta, dropped the mic and walked away. So not a lot of discussion pads were available for ransomware anymore. But he was active on Torilauta, discussing with people, having chats with them. And then 100 patient records actually do appear on Tor. These are text files that contain the social security number, the phone number, and the email address. Not sure if it had the home address. Don't remember that detail, probably not. But all of these details and the psychiatrist's note from all of their visits, just written down there in plain Finnish for anyone to read. And they just published 100 of those. And inside the folder, there was this file, 000readme.txt, where they say that they've been trying to negotiate, but Vastaamo does not want to negotiate. I have no information what was going on with Vastaamo in the background, but I know the police were involved at this time, of course. And they're just trying to put more pressure. And as you can see, they even set up an email for press, because they were trying to go through the publicity route. Just let's put pressure on making this public. I'm not sure if that ever works. Maybe just this, of course it's a known TTP, this double extortion. Just first you pay to regain your data, and then you pay so that we don't leak it. And I think they just kind of tore a page from the playbook of let's just start extorting with leaking the data. But for a company like this, like just the fact that somebody has the data, that's the problem, not that somebody is saying that they're going to leak it. It's already lost from their opinion, from their point of view. And another thing that I paid attention to, because of course we were watching this very carefully, what's happening. And I checked the patient records, and mostly the discussion about the patient records that were released, the first 100 ones. And it wasn't like they started alphabetically, or that they started by date of visit, or anything like that. It just seemed like they've been going through the data and picked individual ones. And it doesn't seem random. And to read Finnish therapist notes, well, I guess machine translation is good enough to kind of get the gist of it, but are you going to just feed those back and forth to find most damaging ones? Like, how are you going to identify the people? I just got the feeling that these are not professional ransomware operators. I'm not even sure if there's many of them or just one, and they're probably Finnish. So some people contact the attacker at Torilauta and ask him to remove their individual files and just permanently delete my information. And he keeps using the green text with the double hashtags. It's called a trip code. And you can register that, because otherwise you can just set your username, but your trip code is unique. So he's been using that one to communicate and talk about this case as a sort of a proof of identity. And he's naming his price to removing one file and sending a Bitcoin address and a cock.li, some kind of a reference to roosters, possibly, I'm not sure, email address. And I checked a lot later, he never received the payment, so just selling this removal service doesn't seem to take off very well. But obviously people who have their information there, who know that there were patients at Vastaamo, are already worried at this point. And he lost his email account, so he set up a new one, and a bit of a back and forth. And people are asking about, like, starting to hint about the fact that what kind of information they've discussed with their therapists. And if you think about it, like, what is a therapist for? Like, what is the purpose of you going to talk to them instead of having 2 beers and talking to your buddy? It's like there's stuff you don't want to talk with people you know. It's something you want to get off your chest. And the therapist relationship is built on trust, on the absolute trust that they have a legal requirement and an ethical obligation never to tell anybody what you tell them. So this is the most private information that you can emit, basically, in this situation. The discussion is not very enthusiastic, so it doesn't seem like Ransom Man is that interested in dealing with individual people and collecting like 0.05 bitcoins, which is worth what today? I don't even know. But he continues this stuff, and on the second day, as promised, he leaks another 100 patient files. And then, on the third day, not of Christmas, of this crime, something amazing happens. Like absolutely amazing, because we've been watching this Tor site like hawks, and we had a scraper script that went through it every hour just to see if there's new files. And on the 23rd, our scraper script, which started 3 minutes past the full hour, noticed that there's an almost 11 gigabyte file there called vastaamo.tar. And anybody who knows anything about computers, which is I'm guessing at least half of you people, knows that 100 text files is not 11 gigabytes. So extremely interested in what's just been uploaded. Like 30,000, 40,000 text files don't take 11 gigabytes. So our script starts downloading the file. Turns out it's his entire home folder. So he's been running the tar command in a different folder than he was supposed to, in his home folder, and packed it all. And this being Tor, so traffic is slow, takes us a while. We managed to grab a good chunk of it. And other people, too, as you can see from the comments if you speak the Elvish language. It says like, somebody got, that was the previous one, 60 megabytes, and somebody else says that he has like 5,000 patient files. And this is his reaction. After working through this extortion, having the most private secrets of tens of thousands of people, trying to extort 500,000, and then just bungling it all up like this, like accidentally just putting his home folder in a tar file and sharing it. This is his reaction. Whoopsie! It's like, okay, these are not professional ransomware operators, as I said. So what was in the file? PowerPaint mistakes, obviously. Don't know why that's doing that, but anyway, there was all of the patient data. And the file was a .tar, which is short for tape archive. And I think it's a file format that dates around the First World War. So it's very old. It just basically you put one file after the another, no compression, which was perfect for us when we were downloading it, because you can download a partial and just open every file that's in that tar file, even if it's an incomplete download. If it were compressed, much harder, if not impossible, to decompress a partial file, especially a file that you only grab less than half, for example. But the sad thing is that the tar file started with all of the patient records. So anybody who downloaded, let's say more than 500 megabytes of it, had them all. So when you're running sort of a ransom operation, which you shouldn't, that's illegal, but if you are, which you shouldn't, but if you are, one of the things is that you have leverage, and then you have a victim. If you lose your leverage, it's really hard to victimize the victim because they've been victimized at that point. And the patient files were the leverage, and he lost it. So no point in trying to ransom them anymore. It's effectively public. So we all know that data on the internet is like dropping oil in water, just spreads everywhere. There's no way to collect it all or get it cleaned. It's just not possible. So it's out there. We have no idea how many people downloaded it. So the web server disappears. Ransom man stops communicating on Torilauta. Next day, I hope he had a terrible hangover. And he still tries this last-ditch effort because he has everybody's email address. So he sends all of the patients an email with a personalized ransom message, like, pay me and I will remove your files. Because most of the people affected, at this point, they don't know that it's already gone. The data's out there. He has no leverage towards the company, because of course he realizes that we've realized at this point that the data is gone and he's got nothing on us anymore. But individual people don't know that. But luckily, it doesn't seem to work very well. This is the message that he sent. Mr. and Mrs., first name, surname, and their social security number, just to prove that they know who they are, and blah, 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 blah. Another page from the Your Friendly Neighborhood Black Hat playbook, trying just this long explanation, and a ridiculous 24-hour cliff, I think might be the word, until the payment is more. So if you haven't ever used Bitcoin, if you don't sleep at all, 24 hours is barely enough to start understanding how to buy it and use it and pay with it. At least for me, but I'm a bit dumb. Some are smarter, but unrealistic. And again, just sort of a mad dash effort. But most people declined the offer because the information security community was collecting these personalized Bitcoin addresses and trying to see how much money Ransom Man made with this whole terrible attack. And it was a very paltry sum, maybe a few thousand euros. I don't remember the exact sum, but he's not buying a Bugatti with that money. He's not even buying a nice jacket. And then it's all over. Just disappears. Everybody knows that the data is out there, the extortion is pointless, and it all goes quiet. I'll come back to what happened after that, but I want to talk a bit about Vastaamo's systems, because I'm sure this interests a lot of people. Most of you probably know a part of this. And this is gathered from the parts that are available at a government official website that state facts about the system. And I will treat those facts as public information, as they are de facto public information. Vastaamo had a website called Potilasrekisteri, which means patient registry. It was just a website running on a server somewhere, which had a web application and a MySQL database. The web application was used for the therapists to gather their notes. And this was probably one of the big draws for a lot of the therapists. They had this, let's say, digitalization leap kind of thing 10 years ago that you could just write your notes here and you could do your billing here, and all of this was, I've been told that it was a big draw for a lot of the therapists to join them, so you don't have to figure this out yourself. Like, where do I put the notes, and how do I do billing, and do I buy pasteli from Ostos TV, or how do I do this? So this was it, and this was the vulnerable server. This was the one that was breached. If we go back, we see that the IP address has some history. This doesn't go back all the way. And I tried searching Shodan when I was making this presentation, and there was a website for it, which showed which ports had been open and accessible to the internet, at least from the point of view of Shodan. But no results were found, of course, because the server wasn't live anymore. But luckily, Shodan has a historical search, which has less data and doesn't actually capture things like banners. But it will show you a timeline of when ports are open. And 3306 is the MySQL port. And it was opened in November 2017, bound to the internet-facing interface, so it's internet accessible. It remained open for a very long time. So we can see it was closed only in March 19. So okay, you have a MySQL port open to the internet. So what? There's 5 million of them. Who cares? And fair enough. Security professionals, we care. Shouldn't do that unless you have an absolutely good reason and no way to get around it, which you shouldn't even have. But if you painted yourself into the corner architecturally, then I guess, yeah. But I'm not sure what the 5 million excuses are here. I'm not sure what the excuse was at Vastaamo either. There was some discussion on why it was opened, but those are probably things that will become public later on. The next question is, of course, okay, an open port to the internet, there's a bunch of those. Is that a problem? Well, the problem was that the root account was available, would accept connections from the internet, and had no password set. Because this is from vastaamo.tar, the file that the attacker leaked. And there was a file called MySQL logins, which had 2,171 lines. And each of those lines were an IP address, username, and password. And with this patient registry database server, we can see this line, which just has a blank password. Found some evidence that the blank password was there even from the forensic investigation, which was difficult because, of course, what's a log and why do I need it? So there weren't a lot of those. But yeah, the stories you've heard about the default password, that's not actually true. They did not have a default password here. They had no password. So we did the investigation and identified at least 2 unauthorized accesses. One in December 18, another one on March 19. Let's just call them breach 1 and breach 2, just to make this simple. It was made more difficult than it should have been just by the fact that there were no logs. It was just a couple of weeks back. Some programs had more logs, so we could look back at the times of some of these events, but there was no really no, let's say, centralized logging structure that we can go to see what kind of access there has been to this MySQL account. Server, sorry. And there was a lot of obstacles there. But we could really recover any signs of activity other than a login and then an exit for the December 18 access. But March 19 was something actually had an effect on Vastaamo's business, because it was a drive-by extortion. At that time, there was somebody who was active doing these drive-by extortions. They would go to Showdown or whatever and scan a bunch of MySQLs and then try to log into those using default credentials, like credentials spraying and stuffing and all that stuff, brute forcing their way in. And when they managed to get in, they would drop the tables and leave a message called, "Please read me XMG." And that message could be found on a bunch of people. This is somebody on GitHub complaining about the fact that their database is lost. And this is the exact same message that we found had appeared on Vastaamo's server on the 15th of March in 19. So, of course, when your database gets dropped, your web application starts malfunctioning, and that is something that usually alerts the system administrators to do something. So they realize that this thing is going on. They rebuild the server. They just they have backups, thank God. So thank God. And they recreated the database, and then they realized that their MySQL port is open to the internet, so they close it. As we could see on the Showdown slide, March 15th. After that, Showdown doesn't see that it's open anymore. And they add some security software, do some basic hardening. So after that point in time, it wasn't world accessible anymore. But the problem is that neither of these attacks point towards Ransom Man or the attack that yielded him the database. So it was still an open question that when did the data leak? Because the server held no clues for that. But we had a couple of outside data sources. The most important of them was ISP NetFlow, which we could see a large spike going into a Swedish IP address owned by the Mulvad VPN service provider. So that's suspicious. And also, thanks to Ransom Man being a klutz, we also had the patient database that he had, at least the text files that he ran from it. And we could do a correlation and see what are the latest patient registry entries in the database, and they happen to coincide with this spike to Malware VPN. So putting 1 + 1 together, I think it's likely, the most likely time that this attack happened was in 2018, by the end of the year. A technical root cause is a misconfigured server. That's it, basically. That was the magnificent Vastaamo hack. This is why he's being called a hacker genius, this ransom man. I don't agree, but this kind of stuff happens. This is pretty standard stuff in a lot of small and middle-sized companies, which Vastaamo wasn't really at that point, but there is a lot of talk and theories of why the server was misconfigured. I have no idea. Not gonna, let's say, entertain any of those theories, because that's really beyond what I know about this case or are even interested in taking part on. But maybe it will become public at some point. Maybe there's a police investigation that really gets to the bottom of this. Maybe there's a root cause for it, other than just incompetence or a mistake. But yeah, there you have it. That was the reason. Of course, about the question is always about regulation. Like, surely there's regulation. You just can't put all of this mental nuclear stuff into a database and then just have it open to the internet and nobody's going to intervene. But that's the Finnish person in you thinking that the authorities have got your back whatever happens. They don't. The regulation splits into two parts. There's category A and category B. And category A is when you connect your software to the national patient registry database called Kanta, which is actually quite regulated. There needs to be a data security audit. You need to get a certificate. You need to have testing. You need to make sure that everything is compatible with Kanta, and your systems need to be secured, basically, before you can actually access that. And category B is for things like appointment booking, which is technically patient data because it has times of appointments and stuff. But it is not as hardly regulated as systems that directly connect to Kanta. And the problem that Vastaamo had at this time was that there was no specific regulation on psychiatric therapy notes. And they were trying to get something from the authorities, some kind of understanding of how they should treat this kind of stuff, because a lot of patients did not want their notes in Kanta alongside all of their other information so that their general practitioner could go and read about their psychiatric problems. So there was it's a very deep subject. I'm not going to go further into it. But let's just say this was not their choice by default. They didn't just go, let's go with category B and YOLO and whatever. But this was a not directly connected system, so it had its own database. And didn't generate documents that are stored in Kanta. No need to audit it technically. Risk assessments, auditing, all of this stuff is done for a company like that. They had authorities and come and check that they have the correct amount of fire extinguishers and the exits are not blocked and that they have the brochures both in Finnish and Swedish, but nobody scanned their MySQL to see if the port's open, for example, or tried to do a penetration testing. That's just not part of auditing in this kind of a thing. So that's basically it. That is the hack in the nutshell. Of course, it brings us back to the thought that data is really not just data. Because when you read, like, press loves numbers, and when they can tell you that there's 300 million personal files of dentist appointments lost on the internet, that's one thing. But numbers never really grasp what that data is, because if it's your phone number and a date, like, who cares? But in this case, the numbers were both high, but the quality of the data, what the data was It's just people's secrets, basically. And it's just really hard to kind of wrap your head around this, because this turned out to be the biggest crime in Finland to date. Hopefully to the ages, but we'll see. Act 3 is catharsis refers to the purifying element of going through large emotions. It's also usually the part of play where the tragic end happens. And when I made this presentation, this is actually version 2, the situation was different than what it is today. I'm not sure this fits fully, but I'll let you be the judge of it. But the whole point of this, what happened with Vastaamo, is that they dealt in trust, because the trust was essentially what made the therapeutic relationship work, what made it possible for you to actually go through the process that helps you. And that trust was broken, so it was quite obvious that the business can't withstand that. So it took 4 months from the hack for Vastaamo to file for bankruptcy. Just 4 months, that's not a very long time. If you think that they had the business idea in 2008 and grew the business actually quite a sustainable way over the years, and they all had hundreds of people working for them, and then in just 4 months it's all gone, just like that. Somebody forgot to set the good password for the root account, or whatever the reason is. That's kind of amazing, because we've seen a lot of big companies get breached, and you can see their stock prices go down a bit, and then everybody's like, so what? And it goes back up. Usually a bit higher than it was before. It must be all of those public messages, how they take security and privacy seriously, that they always send after a hack. Vastaamo wasn't that lucky. The data protection officials in Finland, of course, took an interest, and they sanctioned, I'm not sure which one is the right word here, so I'll say them both, Vastaamo for 608,000 euros. And when they did this, they used the Nixu report extensively to justify it, and that is where most of it is readable. You can go to Finlex and find the whole thing. It's very long, but if you're into legalese and you've got like 4 hours and a couple of good beers, go for it and go read it. It's actually quite interesting. Of course, there's a complicating factor. Intera, as we remember, bought the majority share of Vastaamo, but they disputed the sale of those shares because they said, and I'm not sure what's factual here because there are claims made both ways, but they say that Ville Tapio was aware of the March 15th hack, not the Vastaamo hack, but the March 15th hack at the time that they did the trade. He disputes that. He says that he was not told. It's not really for me to say. It's still an ongoing thing. The press has been at least misleading in this, because at least based on my information, it's not final, and there are still disputes ongoing. And then in August 21, just to show that there is no limit to what psychopathology is freely expressed over the internet, somebody sets up a search engine for all of the patient files and puts it on Tor, and then gets a Finnish domain address to point towards it. Just lowering the barrier of getting access to all of that information that's supposed to be private. Because at this point, it had been popping up here and there, and the big worry was that the social security numbers could be used for identity theft. Of course, that was the worry for those people who didn't really talk about anything that sensitive with the therapists. But for all of those looky-loos who want to go and put their neighbor's name there and see if they have some dark secrets, some asshole put this up. Well, this was actually on and off online on the Tor address for quite a while, and the press helped get it publicity by actually writing an article about it. the CEO of Vastaamo, who I rank among one of the main victims of this whole crime. Of course, as a CEO of this kind of a company, with big reward comes big risk. Was it the other way around? But anyway, he was ultimately responsible to make sure that the trust that the patients placed on the company was handled carefully. There has been a lot of discussion about who did what, who knew about what did the system admins do, what did Ville do. A bunch of it has been hashed out in the press, and just I don't even know what to make of it, because there's a lot of information that I know is probably not accurate. But anyway, in September, Ville is indicted, and the systems administrators were also investigated, but no charges were brought against them, the two people who were responsible for security, maintaining the server, which I would argue includes securing it. 22,000 criminal complaints was the number that I found in the newspaper. Previously, I had 25,000 here. I'm not sure if that's accurate either, but whatever the number is, this is still the biggest individual crime that has happened in Finland when you count the number of victims. And well, this being the digital leap, of course, upscaling things is easy. But this just, well, yeah. I have a small background in law enforcement. I used to be a police officer for a couple of years. I'm increasingly embarrassed to bring it up, but it's relevant here because the system that was used back then to file criminal reports, still the same. It's not good, and it's manual. So I really felt for the guys for having to feed 22,000 criminal complaints into that system. I'm not sure, they might have changed it. I don't get an update when they do. But if it's still the same thing, I would count the investigators as among the victims of this crime. And they were expected to receive less than 1,000 euros per person for damages. Because the company is bankrupt, doesn't exist anymore, and it has a lot of debt. And in bankruptcy, you settle your debts, and whatever's left, you know what happens with that. But when you have more debt than collectors, than cash reserves, basically, that just means you're not going to pay all your debts, and you're not going to pay damages either. And it gets pretty quiet. Of course, the national discussion over data security and data protection and all of this, and legislation and auditing and all this kind of continues during this time. But the thing I'm watching for is like, when do they catch the guy? Because I want to know when they catch the guy. Because that is what really interests me. Because I want to put a name on the nemesis. Because even if people don't think about it as a story, this is a story. And when you don't have a proper bad guy in a story, the nemesis, then you're going to just put somebody in there. Because we kind of psychologically, we need to see a bad guy in everything. You need to just have somebody to blame. So a lot of that blame was placed on Ville Tapio personally, on Vastaamo as a company. And Ransom Man became almost like this sideshow, comical figure, like not even a real person. I just wanted to put a name on it, just to see who it is. It took them 2 years with periodical updates of police being very close to catching him. And in November 2022, the police issue a European arrest warrant for a 20-year-old Finnish man. Which was expected. Not yet. Next slide. Anyway, I made the conscious decision not to name any names here on this issue, because on the court of public opinion, the person was judged already, and still a suspect. I'd like to remind everybody of the fact that we live in a lawful society, and somebody is charged, and then they're found guilty at a court of law. The other reason is that if he did it, I don't want to just give him the glory of saying his name out loud on stage. But 2 weeks ago, He was arrested in France and is currently waiting transportation to Finland. He has not contested that. So we'll see what happens, because I really can't wait for the trial. I want to see what happens in that, and I hope that the police have a very solid case and that we see justice done in this situation, because all of the victims, all of the tens of thousands of people who had their privacy broken and violated by this callous and uncaring individual really deserve that closure. But that's it. I won't take any questions because I'm not sure I have the answers. If I do, just rather come talk to me privately if you have something you want to say. Thank you very much for listening to this case. I hope you learned something new today, and enjoy Disobey.